April 2023, Seattle. The rain had just stopped when the candles were lit on the long mahogany table. The room smelled of lemon polish and old wood, the kind of scent that clings to legacies. My grandfather, Richard Whitmore, sat at the head of the table, frail but proud. 82 years of building Whitmore & Co., a company once worth $300 million reflected in the gleam of the silver trophies behind him. I stood beside him, holding the match, feeling the air heavy with something unsaid. He smiled at me, that soft tremor of a man who'd seen wars and markets fall and rise again. To new leadership, he said, and everyone clapped. My stepfather, Victor Lane, raised his glass, his Rolex catching the chandelier light. To Clara, he said, voice smooth as oil, may she carry the Whitmore name with grace. I remember the way the champagne bubbled against my tongue, the fizz almost masking the unease. After dinner, the laughter faded. Victor lingered near the study door, leaning on the frame like he owned the house. Big night, he said. Your grandfather's really putting the torch in your hands? I nodded, pretending not to see the smirk twitching at the corner of his mouth. He built this company with integrity, I said. That torch means something. Victor chuckled softly. Integrity is expensive these days. His words hung in the air, heavy and metallic. Later, when everyone had left, my grandfather called me to the study. The rain returned, whispering against the window panes. He opened a velvet box and handed me his old watch. It's time, Clara, he said. Whitmore & Co. is yours. My throat tightened. You mean? Tomorrow I'll sign it, he said. You've earned it. I hugged him, feeling his heartbeat slow but steady. It was the rhythm of everything I had ever loved. Victor appeared at the door again, his smile too bright. You're making a big announcement without legal counsel, he asked lightly. My grandfather's eyes sharpened. I don't need counsel to pass on my legacy. Victor's jaw flexed. Funny thing about legacies. They change hands faster than people think. The next morning, before the documents could be signed, Victor called an emergency meeting. His tone was calm, confident. There's been a change, he said. The company has already been sold. My grandfather's cane hit the marble floor. Sold? His voice cracked like breaking glass. Victor folded his arms. Last month. A merger with an investment group. All finalized. I handled the transition. I felt my pulse thud in my throat. You handled what he smiled. You were too slow, Clara. The market waits for no one. My grandfather tried to stand but stumbled. His hand clutched his chest. Panic scattered the room. Call 911, I shouted. Victor stood still, his face expressionless, as if watching a bad movie he'd already seen. The siren arrived fast, the red lights washing over the Whitmore portrait. I followed the paramedic's shoes, soaked in rain, the smell of antiseptic replacing the lemon polish. Victor's voice echoed behind me. This is business, Clara. Don't make it personal. Outside, the ambulance doors slammed. I looked down. The watch my grandfather had given me had slipped from my wrist. It lay face up on the wet pavement, cracked, but still ticking. Inside the case, a line I'd never noticed was engraved, in case of greed. Remember who you are. The engine roared, carrying him away. I stood in the rain, the company's skyline faint in the distance, neon lights reflecting off puddles like a city full of ghosts. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Whitmore & Co. announces merger under Lane Group Holdings. My name wasn't mentioned once. My hands shook, not from cold, but from clarity. I understood then that greed isn't loud. It's quiet. It smiles across the dinner table. It raises a glass to you before cutting the floor beneath your feet. And I knew one thing with perfect certainty. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to learn exactly how he did it. And then one day I'd make him wish he hadn't. Have you ever watched greed destroy what love built? By sunrise, the house had the soft quiet of a library after closing, and I took that quiet to my grandfather's desk like a promise. The merger headline still sat on my phone, neat and cold, pretending to be destiny. I turned it face down, unlocked the side drawer with the small brass key he always tucked under the pen tray, and found a folder labeled Board Actions, a leather ledger from the 80s, and an envelope with my name written in the patient blue of a man who never hurried the truth. I lined the papers in a row, poured coffee that tasted like resolve, and began where accountants begin with sequence and signature. Meeting minutes first, attendance, motions. A flow of routine that used to feel like church until a date last spring, when the handwriting on the sign-off line changed from my grandfather's careful loops to a rushed black scrawl that loved its own speed a little too much. That was the week Victor began appearing at every meeting. That was the week the language shifted from stewardship to transaction. I looked for the instrument everyone was citing the transfer that claimed to bless a sale without me. It lived behind a plastic tab called Consent Agreement, a sleepy title meant to lower a reader's guard. Page 1 was ceremony. Page 2 referenced a countersignature line for the bloodline heir. Page 3 pretended that line had been signed. Page 4 held a scan of my grandfather's name, flat and perfect, with edges too clean, the ink too uniform, the life taken out of it, the way a photocopy turns a living thing into a shadow. I felt anger rise, not the loud kind, but the calibrated kind that makes your eyes slow down. I opened the file on my laptop, pulled up document properties, and there it was, the quiet confession machines make. Created 9 days before the board meeting by a home office scanner Victor had installed in the guest room, modified again the afternoon he flew my grandfather to Palm Springs for rest, authored by a user account that matched his initials. He had trusted the speed of a headline and not the patience of a record. I printed the properties page, photographed every sheet, and placed the images into a vault folder with 2-factor sign-in that even my past self would not have guessed. Only then did I open the envelope with my name. Inside lay a plastic key card and a note in my grandfather's hand. If you are reading this, it means someone forgot what Whitmore means. Use the card. Ask Amelia. Trust your eyes. I pressed the card to my palm until the plastic warmed. Down the hall, I heard his step, careful but alive. I brewed tea, brought it to the kitchen, and we sat without talking while the last of the night rain slid down the window. He looked at the watch on my wrist and then at my face. "Remember who you are," the engraving said. I did. At 9, I drove downtown to Henderson and Tate, where Amelia kept history arranged like a spine. Her office smelled of paper and eucalyptus and the confidence of a woman who had memorized the weight of evidence. I did not make speeches. I laid the binder on her desk, opened the laptop to the properties window, and waited while her eyes moved in even beats. When she finished, she leaned back, folded her hands, and spoke in the soft tone of a verdict. "You have sequence and intent. The image will break under inspection. The missing bloodline counter-signature is not a defect. It is a hole in the floor. We need the founding deed, and any side letters Victor used to slip a vote." I placed the plastic card between us. "He left this for me," I said. She smiled the way people smile when a plan reveals that it had been quietly ready for years. Of course he did. We went down the corridor to a storage room where gray boxes lined the wall like patient witnesses. Amelia swiped the card against a panel. A safe door clicked open and she lifted out a red binder, stamped Founding Instruments. The pages were crisp, tabs neat language, clean as rain. Midway through sat Clause 17. Be a line my grandfather had quoted to me when I was 19 and thought balance sheets were only about numbers. Any transfer of ownership not countersigned by a direct bloodline heir shall be void, and the prior state restored within the period specified. It was not dramatic, it was exact. Amelia turned another tab and tapped the margin. "See this," she said. "Interest on ill-gotten amounts accrues from the date of violation until repayment." She did not need to call it 17C for it to land like a bell. We copied what we needed, hashed the scans, returned every page to its place, and agreed on a rule. He will make noise. We will make a record. On the drive home, I felt the first shape of calm since the night of the toast. Not relief, direction. At the house, I hid the working set in an accordion folder behind a stack of cookbooks. Victor liked to patrol the study and never noticed the kitchen. Then I opened the corporate card portal. His name appeared on executive charge travel expense fuel program, maintenance vendor, and concierge line. I did not need to raise my voice to say no. I clicked suspend for each one and watched the status flip. Gray lines look quiet until they strand a man in front of a pump with a blinking screen that says, "See attendant." The call came 12 minutes later, charm on the first ring, irritation on the second, then a clip demand. He wanted to know why his card had failed on the way to a client lunch. I told him accounting had flagged reconciliation gaps and the system had auto-suspended several accounts pending review. He told me to fix it now. I told him to send receipts. The pause was long enough for truth to take a breath. He hung up. 3 minutes later, an email arrived with a pile of scans that did not equal the bank totals. A lunch for 6, billed as a one-on-one. A gift shop purchase taped to a business dinner. A hotel charge on a weekend that did not match any travel calendar. I filed the lot into a folder named Pattern and mirrored it to legal hold. The more he explained, the more the numbers told a cleaner story. By afternoon, my grandfather returned from a checkup thinner, but alert. The doctor prescribed short walks and patience. He took both and then added theater. In the den, he stopped beside Victor, who was on speaker with someone who spoke the language of eager capital. My grandfather tilted his head, asked gentle questions, and let the answers spill. Names, dates, terms, confidence. When he shuffled away, his eyes cut to mine. "He thinks I do not follow," he whispered. "I am following." The courage that rose in my chest was not fire. It was ballast. That night, I assembled a packet for Amelia, the forged scan, the properties page, the minutes that referenced a signature that never existed, the suspended card list with timestamps, the email chain that drew a straight line from claim to contradiction. At the end, I wrote one sentence that was both confession and compass. He thought I was quiet. He forgot I read balance sheets like novels. I pressed send and watched the small blue bar move to done. Before sleep, I stood at the window and looked at the lake taking back the city lights. The watch ticked on my wrist, steady as a metronome, for a life that was about to change keys. In the morning, I would pull access logs for the guest room scanner and request building entries for the night the false signature was created. I would ask the bank for a merchant copy of the fuel transaction that failed, not to shame him, but to place the moment on a map that others could read. I would not threaten. I would not plead. I would mark each fact in ink that did not smudge and let the clause do what it was written to do. By Monday, the air in Seattle had that washed clarity it gets after too much rain, the kind that makes glass storefronts look like mirrors. I used those reflections to rehearse a face that could pass for forgiveness. Victor had texted me the night before with his usual charm disguised as authority. "Let us talk like adults over coffee. Elm Street Cafe at 11. I typed back sure with no punctuation, the universal signal of detachment. The cafe was all exposed brick and overconfident lattes, the kind of place where people talk about mergers as if they were weather forecasts. I arrived early, ordered a cappuccino, and adjusted the watch on my wrist. The recording feature had been tested twice in the last hour. The first time to capture the sound of my own steady breathing. The second to make sure I would not flinch when the red light blinked. Victor arrived 5 minutes late, expensive cologne arriving first, that boardroom smile already loaded with its next performance. "Clara," he said, as if he were greeting a colleague he secretly owned. "You look well considering the chaos." I smiled thinly. "You too, Victor. How is the chaos treating you?" He laughed too loudly, sat down, and signaled the barista as though money followed him like a pet. He leaned back, stretched his arms, and said, "I should thank you." The merger drew more attention than expected. Our consulting arm made a fine entrance, $2.4 million fine to be precise. I let the words hang. Consulting arm. $2.4 million. He stirred his coffee slowly, eyes glinting with the pleasure of self-exposure. "Cayman accounts have their charm," he said casually. "You move things around, fees disappear, no one notices." I tilted my head as if impressed while the watch recorded every syllable. My pulse beat under the strap, but the rest of me stayed still. "You always had a way with logistics," I said. He grinned. "It is all about velocity, Clara. The slow ones get audited. The fast ones get quoted." The barista placed the check on the table and I slid a small folded bill under it. He glanced at it, smirked, and said, generous as ever. I smiled. "Consider it a return. You once gave me a fake 100 as a joke." Interest accumulated. He blinked, uncertain if I was teasing or confessing. He tucked the bill in his pocket anyway. We walked out together, his words still riding the caffeine. He talked about vision, about leadership, about how I should stop being sentimental about legacy and start understanding liquidity. I nodded at the right times, let him fill the silence with his own echo. Outside, wind brushed the edges of his suit. He pulled his coat tighter, his voice lowering. "Your grandfather is not getting younger. When he goes, we can formalize a few things. Clean transition, full partnership." I said softly, "You mean after he dies?" He paused, but recovered with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "After he retires, of course." I watched a drop of rain slide down his cuff. It looked like punctuation. He stepped into a car and waved the picture of success, waving at its own reflection. When he drove away, I let the mask drop. The recording stopped with a small chime. I replayed the last line twice. "Cayman accounts have their charm." That would be my starting gun. Back at the house, my grandfather sat by the window, newspaper folded on his lap. His recovery had been slow but sharp. When he saw me, he reached into his cardigan pocket and handed me something small and cold. A key, old and slightly bent, marked FC, Founding Clause. He nodded once. "The safe behind the piano. The music will guide you." I felt the weight of it in my palm. In the study, the piano gleamed silent and polished. I pressed the key against the panel behind the leg, and a click answered. Inside was a small iron box and an envelope dated 1973. The handwriting matched the founding documents I had seen at Henderson and Tate. Inside the envelope were letters, one of them a note from the original bank stating the founding clause conditions for bloodline control. At the bottom, a handwritten addendum by Richard Whitmore himself. Future amendments may not bypass the bloodline without full consent and proof of consideration. I photographed everything, labeled each file with the date, and sent the first batch to Amelia with one line of text. Sequence confirmed. She replied within minutes. "Keep him talking. Every brag is evidence." The next morning, Victor called. His voice was lighter, the charm restored. "You were quiet yesterday," he said. "Are we good?" "We are always good," I answered. "I might even have a few ideas for future expansion." He loved the word expansion. He offered to meet again Friday, same cafe, his treat. I agreed. That night, my grandfather and I ate soup while rain tapped the windows. He looked stronger, color returning. He said softly, "He is afraid of silence. Let him hear it." The next day, I met Amelia again to review the files. She smiled when I told her about the recording. "A confession delivered over espresso," she said. "You could not have scripted it better." We talked about next steps, how to chain the evidence so it could not be dismissed as coincidence. I left her office with the kind of calm that feels like precision. By Thursday, Victor sent another text, this one full of enthusiasm about a new partnership that would make us both very comfortable. I saved the message, printed it, filed it. Friday morning came gray and bright. He ordered a macchiato, I ordered patience. He spoke of new investors, of moving funds through different accounts for tax efficiency. I asked casual questions, and he answered all of them. When he stepped away to take a call, I left the folded copy of Clause 17B under his napkin. Anonymous, no signature. By the time he found it, I was already across the street watching through the window. He unfolded it, scanned the line about ownership reverting if not signed by bloodline, and froze. I could almost see the math happen behind his eyes. Within hours, his assistant called 3 banks. By noon, his accounts were under review for irregular activity. When he called me that evening, his voice was strained but polite. "Have you been in touch with compliance?" he asked. "They are being difficult." I said something vague about system updates and wished him a pleasant weekend. Then I hung up and laughed for the first time in weeks. It was not loud, just clean. I looked at the watch and whispered a question meant only for the quiet. "Would you play dumb if you knew you held the trigger?" The next morning, the clouds over Seattle looked like folded paper, and the air carried that thin clarity that makes decisions sharper. I arrived at Henderson and Tate just after 8. The glass doors opened with the same soft hiss as a secret, and the receptionist nodded me through to Amelia's office. She was already there, surrounded by files stacked like fortifications and a mug of tea that smelled faintly of mint. Her eyes met mine, and without preamble, she said, "We have something." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside lay the full founding deed of Whitmore and Company. The paper had the texture of time and the language of precision. Clause 17. B stood at the center like a quiet verdict. Ownership transfers revert if not signed by direct bloodline. The line was clear enough to slice through any corporate disguise. My breath came out steady, but my pulse betrayed me. "He forged a signature," I said. She nodded. "And the clause means the sale collapses. It means everything reverts to you." Her calm was surgical. She turned another page and pointed at a section I had not noticed. 17C. Any profit gained under fraud must be repaid with interest within 180 days. Interest, I repeated. She smiled thinly. Compound interest, Clara. It punishes faster than guilt. We both knew what that meant. If Victor had already transferred consulting fees as he bragged, he had the debt had already started breathing down his neck. I took photos of the clauses with my phone, each shot steady enough for admissible evidence. Amelia said we should not confront him yet. "Fear is an honest accountant," she said. "Let him calculate it himself." On my way home, I stopped at a small cafe near the courthouse, ordered black coffee, and opened my laptop. The air smelled of roasted beans and urgency. I created a new email account named Legacy Review and drafted a message that quoted Clause 17C verbatim. The subject line read, "Notification of pending reversal." I attached no files, no threats, no explanation, just the words from the deed and a polite line. This notice pertains to funds transferred under unauthorized authority. The message was unsigned. I scheduled it for delivery at 9:30 the next morning and closed the laptop. Justice would wake him up with his own imagination. The next day, Amelia called early to confirm the deed had been notarized for digital archiving. Her tone carried a trace of amusement. "You should see the banking chatter," she said. "One of his accounts has already triggered an alert for suspicious movement." I smiled into the phone. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it auto-debits. That afternoon, I sat at my grandfather's bedside reading the newspaper aloud while he pretended to nap. When I reached the business section, he opened one eye and said softly, "Has the wolf smelled the trap yet?" "Almost," I said. He smiled faintly, then let him pace a little longer. Around noon, my phone buzzed with an email from an address I recognized. Victor's assistant asking if I had heard anything from the auditors. She wrote that the compliance team had frozen 2 transactions pending verification of origin. I replied that I had no insight, but wished them luck. An hour later, Victor himself called, his voice strained, but still coated in the residue of confidence. "Clara, we need to coordinate messaging," he said. "There are rumors about irregularities." I let a pause stretch until it became a mirror. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "Banking. Some idiot must have flagged a transfer as potential laundering. Routine nonsense. I said I was sure it was all routine and suggested he speak directly with his financial institution. I could almost hear him sweating through the line. When he hung up, I exhaled slowly and let the silence fill the room like satisfaction. By evening, I learned from Amelia that the bank had filed an automated suspicious activity report due to multiple transfers just under the federal threshold. He had tried to protect his money by splitting it into small pieces and ended up triggering the system he thought he could outsmart. It was poetic arithmetic. At dinner, my grandfather chuckled when I told him. "Never outrun math," he said. "It has better shoes." Later that night, I replayed the cafe recording from the week before the one where Victor bragged about Cayman accounts and consulting fees. His tone now sounded less like triumph and more like confession. I saved the file under the name Echo 1 and backed it to 2 separate drives. The next morning, the fallout began to bloom. His lawyer left a voicemail requesting an urgent meeting. The finance team sent a memo titled "Immediate Reconciliation Required," and by afternoon, his corporate cards were declined again, this time by the bank, not by me. Reports filtered in that he had stormed into the branch, demanding answers. Cameras likely captured the scene, a man who sold his integrity for convenience, now arguing with a teller over missing digits. The irony would have made my grandfather proud. I spent the rest of the day organizing documents into folders labeled Sequence, Intent, and Recovery. Each piece of evidence was another rung on the ladder he had built for his own fall. When night came, I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out over the city. The lights along the bay flickered like patient witnesses. I thought about how easy it is to mistake noise for power and how silence often carries the sharper edge. The message had been delivered, the fear planted, and the system would now do the heavy lifting. He would call everyone, accuse everyone, and every call would leave another record. I closed my laptop, feeling the calm that only order can bring. Justice was not a storm. It was accounting. It balanced itself line by line until truth emerged like profit after audit. And somewhere across town, a man who believed he was untouchable was learning how touchless systems can be. Seattle in late May has a way of pretending to be calm while plotting its next storm. I spent the morning at my desk with 3 screens open, each a window into Victor's growing panic. The banks had frozen his accounts for review, and the compliance department was circling his transfers like vultures reading a map. Amelia's message came at 10 sharp. "It is time to escalate. You need an independent verifier, someone with the credibility to make noise, but the loyalty to stay quiet." I already knew the name. Marcus Dale. We had met in graduate school before ambition had learned to fake kindness. He was now a mid-level auditor known for his obsession with precision and his allergy to corruption. I called him at noon. "Marcus," I said, "I need someone who knows how to find truth in numbers without leaving fingerprints." He paused. "That sounds like trouble." "It is," I said, "but it pays in satisfaction." We met that evening in a quiet bar near Pike Place Market. He looked older, the lines around his eyes shaped by too many balance sheets and too few vacations. I told him everything except the parts that would put him at risk. His smile was half disbelief, half admiration. "You want me to audit a man who thinks he is untouchable and let him believe I am for sale?" "Exactly," I said. He raised his glass. "For old times and better justice." The next week, the plan took shape. We created a trail of fabricated audit requests printed on fake stationery from a consulting firm that no longer existed. Each document was marked confidential preliminary review and hinted that Clara Whitmore was conducting an internal investigation into financial discrepancies predating the merger. The bait had to look imperfect enough to feel real. We seeded the files into Victor's email through an anonymous tip routed through a public server. The hook caught within hours. He called me, pretending to be calm. "Clara, I received something odd today. Someone claims to have audit data with your name on it." I played innocent. "Probably a phishing attempt. Delete it." He hesitated. "They mentioned VL Holdings." I widened my eyes even though he could not see me. "That shell company does not exist," I said evenly. He laughed nervously. "Of course not." 2 days later, Marcus confirmed the first contact. Victor had reached out through an intermediary requesting a private meeting to discuss, quote, sensitive documentation. We arranged the encounter at a neutral office space rented under Marcus's name. I watched from the cafe across the street, the same Elm Street cafe where Victor once bragged about Cayman accounts. Through the window, I could see Marcus in a dark suit, calm and contained, and Victor leaning forward with the impatience of a man used to buying time. The conversation lasted 30 minutes. When Marcus came out, he looked amused. He tried to bribe me, he said simply. How generous, I asked. A white envelope with cash and a promise of a consulting position at his new venture. I asked what you said. Marcus smiled. I said I would consider it while my camera was already rolling. The footage was crystal clear. Victor's hand sliding the envelope across the table, his voice low and confident, his face caught between arrogance and fear. That night, Marcus sent the file encrypted. I watched it twice. It was not just proof of bribery. It was poetry. The man who sold a company without permission now selling silence for cash. Amelia advised caution. Leak it subtly, she said. Make it look like an internal whistleblower. I waited 2 days, then uploaded the clip to a private employee forum used by Whitmore staff to share training materials. Within an hour, the video spread like static electricity. By evening, it had reached every department inbox, and the subject lines read, in variations, of "Did you see this?" I monitored the chat quietly. Some employees were shocked, others vindicated. The next morning, the shareholders called an emergency meeting. Victor arrived furious, demanding to know who was behind the smear. Amelia attended on my behalf, representing legal oversight. She presented the original audit files with timestamps showing their legitimacy and pointed out that if Victor wished to claim defamation, he would have to submit his own banking records to Discovery. He went silent then. The room filled with attention so thick even the projector hum seemed judgmental. Later I learned from Marcus that Victor tried to contact him again this time, not with cash, but with threats. Marcus recorded those too. When he told me about it, I said quietly, "Keep the files safe. They are worth more than gold." That night I sat by the window listening to the hum of the city and thinking about how justice often wears the face of administration. No swords, no speeches, just paper and patience. I drafted a memo for internal release under the Compliance Division summarizing the company's stance on integrity and accountability. Every line was a blade wrapped in courtesy. I signed it with my grandfather's full name as interim chair. When it circulated through the company network, the responses were instant loyalty from those who had doubted and quiet resignation from those who had enabled Victor. He must have felt the walls narrowing. At 9 that night, he called one last time. "Clara." He began the voice a mix of rage and pleading. "This is madness. The media will hear about it." I said maybe they should. He snapped that he would destroy every file I had. I told him calmly he already had they were his files. The silence that followed was not surprise, but comprehension. He understood he had trapped himself in his own audit. When the call ended, I poured tea instead of wine. My grandfather shuffled in from the hall wearing his robe and that watch that matched mine. He asked if the numbers had confessed yet. "They have," I said. He nodded slowly. "Good. Now let them pay interest." At dawn the next day, the press picked up the story. Local business columns called it the Whitmore Whistle. The company stock dipped briefly, then stabilized as confidence shifted to our side. Victor resigned, officially citing health concerns, but everyone knew health had little to do with it. I sent Marcus a thank you note and wired his fee through Amelia's firm. He replied with a single line, "Audit complete, balance restored." The phrase lingered with me as I watched the city wake. The morning light hit the glass towers like an X-ray revealing the structures inside. I thought about how easy it is for corruption to hide behind charm until arithmetic arrives. Would you leak it or let karma take its course? June 30th arrived with the precision of a closing bell. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel in downtown Seattle gleamed under the early light like a monument to reputation. Inside the grand ballroom, rows of leather chairs faced a long mahogany table. where the board of Whitmore and Company would gather to decide the future of a legacy, already stolen and soon to be reclaimed. I stood near the entrance wearing a slate gray suit and holding a folder so thin it could have been mistaken for nerves. Cameras flashed from the hallway where reporters waited. The press had been invited under the guise of a routine quarterly update. I had given them no hint of what they were about to witness. Victor arrived late as usual, surrounded by assistants carrying tablets and folders embossed with the company logo he had already sold. His smile reached every corner of the room. He shook hands, clapped backs, exuded charm, so polished it almost blinded. When he saw me, his expression softened into the practiced warmth of false reconciliation. "Clara," he said in that low, conspiratorial tone, "I am glad you came. We can finally put all this misunderstanding behind us." I returned the smile. "Yes, Victor, we can." The meeting began with the usual preamble: financials, projections, meaningless optimism. Then Victor took the stage. He gestured toward a massive screen behind him as if conducting an orchestra. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we have secured the merger." Applause filled the room like a storm rehearsed. He continued, "Our new partners bring unprecedented opportunity. Together we will redefine the Whitmore name for a new generation." My grandfather sat in the front row in his wheelchair. His hands clasped, his gaze unwavering. I felt his quiet strength like a current behind my ribs. When Victor paused for breath, I rose. "I would like to review the documents that authorize this merger," I said. He laughed lightly. "Clara, dear, the paperwork is already complete. There is no need to revisit it," the shareholders murmured. I walked to the podium, plugged in a flash drive, and waited for the screen to change. The first image appeared a scan of the signature page from the merger file. The ink was flat, lifeless, the same forged mark that had begun this spiral. I zoomed in on the metadata panel showing the creation date and author initials. Created by VL System. Modified 2 days before the signing. The room grew still. Victor's smile faltered. "That is not relevant," he said too quickly. I advanced the next slide, an email chain, referencing Clause 17B from the founding deed. Ownership transfers revert if not signed by direct bloodline. I read the line aloud. My voice was steady, my grandfather's language lending it weight. Then came Clause 17, C projected larger than life. Any profit gained under fraud must be repaid with interest within 180 days. The words glowed like a countdown. Victor stood frozen halfway between denial and calculation. I turned to the audience. These clauses were ignored. The sale was unauthorized. The funds he diverted now belonged not to him, but to the legacy he betrayed. Someone gasped. I clicked again. The video filled the screen. Victor sitting across from Marcus Dale, sliding the envelope, his voice caught in perfect clarity. Consider it an advance. The sound of his own corruption echoed against the high ceiling. Gasps became murmurs, murmurs into outrage. Reporters raised their phones, recording every second. The hashtag #Whitmore Clause appeared within minutes on live feeds across the city. Victor's face turned the color of paper left too long in the sun. He tried to speak, but the microphone betrayed him, with feedback like static judgment. Security moved closer as if sensing gravity shifting. He slammed his folder shut and shouted fabrication. I raised a hand. All evidence has been verified by Henderson and Tate and cross-checked by the Federal Compliance Bureau. You can verify with the SEC office, whose representative is waiting in the lobby. The doors at the back opened as 2 agents stepped inside carrying identification badges. The silence that followed was not disbelief. It was satisfaction. My grandfather exhaled softly, the sound of a man seeing order restored. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm and steady. "You did it right," he whispered. I knelt beside him just long enough to let him see I believed him. Across the room, Victor's voice cracked. "This is a setup. You are all making a mistake." No one answered. Cameras clicked the soundtrack of downfall. One of the agents approached him calm but firm. "Mr. Lane, you will need to accompany us for a preliminary interview." The color drained from his face. He looked around for allies and found only reflections of himself. As they led him out, the crowd parted like water around a sinking ship. He glanced at me one last time. There was no rage left, only disbelief that his charm had expired. Outside the ballroom, the noise of reporters swelled into applause. The words on their screens were already spreading. Whitmore clause exposed. Fraud unmasked at Fairmont. Inside, I closed the presentation, removed the flash drive, and placed it in my pocket. The board members were still seated in silence, processing the collapse of what had once seemed untouchable. I looked at each of them and said simply, "The truth is not a crisis. It is an audit." One by one, they nodded. My grandfather smiled faintly, the kind of smile that travels from one generation to the next without words. The meeting adjourned, but the story had just begun. Reporters gathered outside microphones like curious birds. I gave them one sentence. He sold the company. I sold the lie he built. They did not ask for more. Truth rarely needs adjectives. When the lobby emptied, I wheeled my grandfather toward the car. The afternoon light streamed through the glass ceiling, painting lines of gold across the marble floor. People watched, but no one spoke. Justice had already spoken for them. In the car, he took my hand again. "Legacy," he said, "is not inheritance. It is accountability that survives you." I nodded, watching the city blur past. My phone buzzed with alerts. The SEC had confirmed an official investigation. The company's internal message board overflowed with relief. Employees who had stayed silent were now writing openly about the pressure they had endured under Victor's rule. It felt less like revenge and more like repair. At sunset, the Fairmont sign glowed above the street, a reminder of the day a room full of power learned that paper and patience can dismantle deceit. Justice that day did not shout, it documented, and the world listened. The days after the Fairmont exposure felt like walking through the echo of an explosion. The headlines that once praised the Whitmore legacy now carried it like a warning. Investors panicked, analysts speculated, and the company stock slid 12% before finding a fragile balance. Inside the building, the atmosphere thickened with tension. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Some employees avoided my eyes as if truth were contagious. Others whispered thank yous in elevators so quietly they might have been prayers. The board initiated a review of leadership conduct and appointed me interim chair, but the congratulatory tone barely hid the fatigue. The media called me the whistleblower heir. To some, I was a hero. To others, the woman who had ruined the family brand. Each headline carved a new layer of exhaustion. Sleep came in fragments. I would wake at 2 a.m. staring at spreadsheets that blurred into constellations. My phone never stopped buzzing. Journalists demanding statements, lawyers confirming filings, shareholders pretending loyalty. Even silence felt loud. One night I sat in my grandfather's study, surrounded by the scent of old paper and cedar polish. The same room where he once taught me to read balance sheets. He sat by the window, now frail and smaller, but still sharp. He listened as I recited updates about the SEC inquiry, the pending restitution, and the chaos in public relations. When I stopped, he looked at me with eyes that seemed to see past numbers. "You did not destroy him, Clara," he said quietly. Truth did. It has its own gravity. It pulls everything into alignment even when people resist. His words settled deeper than comfort. They became a compass. The next morning, I returned to the office to face the storm. A group of employees gathered near reception, pretending to read the company bulletin, but clearly watching me. Someone had pinned a newspaper clipping with my photo under the headline, "Family Civil War." Beneath it, a yellow sticky note read, "Traitor," in red marker. I removed it and carried it to my desk. For a moment, I considered throwing it away, then changed my mind. I pinned it to the corkboard labeled "Customer Feedback." When my assistant saw it, she laughed under her breath. "That is dark," she said. "Justice often is," I replied. Humor was the only oxygen left. At noon, the PR director insisted I hold a town hall to address staff morale. The room filled slowly, people clutching coffee cups like shields. I began with simple numbers, revenue still stable, contracts, intact, audits clean. Then I spoke about dignity, about how accountability does not kill companies, deception does. Some nodded, some stared blankly, but I saw the first flicker of steadiness return. Afterward, one technician approached me and said his father lost his pension during another corporate scandal years ago. He thanked me for preventing that from happening again. It was the only compliment that felt real. That evening, Amelia called to warn me the backlash would shift from Victor to me once the legal dust settled. "They will call you ruthless," she said. "Let them. You are not their comfort. You are their correction." Her words steadied me more than she knew. By July, the noise began to thin, but the loneliness remained. I would walk the empty halls late at night, hearing the faint hum of servers, the same sound that once underscored my childhood visits to the office with Grandpa. Now it felt like a heartbeat that had learned to survive on less oxygen. I missed the simplicity of the fight, the clarity of knowing the enemy. Victory had no shape, only consequence. My reflection in the glass sometimes startled me, not because of fatigue, but because I looked so calm. It was the calm of someone who had accepted that peace costs reputation. When the quarterly report finally stabilized, the analyst shifted tone, calling the company resilient. The same reporters who once questioned my sanity now wrote profiles about integrity leadership. I read none of them. Instead, I sat beside my grandfather's bed each evening, reading aloud from his favorite ledgers, as if numbers could delay time. His breathing grew softer, the pauses longer. One night, he took my hand and said quietly, "I can rest now. The name is safe." I nodded, unable to speak. The next morning, he was gone peacefully, as though his departure was another signature completing a transaction. The funeral was private. Marcus attended, standing silently beside me. Afterward, he handed me a small envelope containing the final audit summary and a note. "Balance complete." I smiled through the ache. At home, the first postcard arrived. No return address, just the word traitor, written in block letters. I pinned it next to the others on the customer feedback board. The wall had become a collage of judgment and absurdity. Some days it made me laugh. Others, it reminded me that truth collects interest too. People move on, but consequences stay curious. Late at night, I would sit by the window watching the city lights flicker like restless data points. I thought of everything lost and everything revealed. I wondered if justice always required collateral damage, or if some truths simply carried a built-in price. Would I still fight if truth cost me everything? I already had. October arrived with rain sharp enough to feel like memory. The city had already begun to forget Victor Lane. His name appeared in small print, now buried under new scandals, his once perfect smile replaced by an old headshot recycled in business articles about greed and downfall. But one evening, as the sky dimmed into the blue of unfinished forgiveness, my phone rang. Unknown number, unknown courage. I answered. His voice was quieter, stripped of its orchestration. "Clara," he said, "I need to see you. They froze my accounts. I cannot leave the country. I just need closure." The word closure sounded almost holy to him, as if justice were a door I had locked from the inside. I waited before replying. Tomorrow noon, Pike Place Market. Public enough to keep him honest. The next day, the market was alive with the noise of Saturday shoppers, gulls circling above vendors shouting prices for salmon and flowers. I chose a corner table at the cafe overlooking the water, wearing a gray blazer, my hair pulled back, a latte steaming in front of me. He arrived late, thinner, colorless, wearing the same watch he once used to time other people's failures. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but the muscles in his face no longer obeyed. "You look well," he said. I nodded. "You look audited." He flinched, then attempted humor. "I deserved that." His hands trembled slightly as he sat. The coffee vendor recognized me, nodded respectfully, and moved away. Victor leaned forward, lowering his voice. They have restricted my accounts. The Cayman branch refused access. The SEC wants full cooperation. I cannot even pay my lawyer. You know how this works." I stayed silent. He mistook it for empathy. "I just need 5%, he said, finally, desperation slipping through the cracks of pride. 5% of what was mine, so I can start over." I studied him carefully. The man who once bought silence now begged for a discount on his own ruin. I said softly, "You already started over, Victor, at 0. He blinked as if the word 0 had weight. His voice cracked. "Clara, you have already won. What more do you want?" "I want the books to balance," I said. He leaned back, exhaling hard. "You always talk like a ledger. No emotion, just numbers." I took a sip of coffee. Numbers are emotions with proof. He looked out at the market crowd eyes following a busker singing an old folk song about rain and repentance. "You think this will satisfy you, watching me fall?" I said nothing. His words spilled faster. "Do you know what it is like to have every door close, every phone call unanswered? I built that company while your grandfather watched from the sidelines. I made it valuable. I made it real. You inherited comfort. I earned survival. I let the bitterness echo because I wanted him to hear himself. Finally, I said quietly, you forged signatures. You hid funds. You lied to a man who trusted you like blood. That is not survival. That is theft in a suit." He looked at me, then the bravado thinning until I could see something like fear underneath. "What if I pay it back, all of it?" he said. The words rushed out like an unplanned confession. "If I pay it back, can I live again?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. Clause 17. C requires repayment with interest within 180 days. His brow furrowed. That deadline passed 3 months ago. I nodded, and the interest is compounding daily. He froze. I could almost see the calculation running through his head, the realization forming like frost across glass. His lips parted, but no sound came. "I used to think karma was patient," I said softly. "Turns out, it bills monthly." The silence that followed stretched until the cafe seemed to dim around us. A vendor outside laughed a sound too alive for the moment. Victor stared at his hands. They looked old now, the nails unkempt, the skin spotted. He whispered, "I thought I had time." "Everyone does," I said. He pushed back his chair, suddenly almost tipping it. People turned to look. He steadied himself, muttered something about air, and stumbled toward the exit. I watched him go, his figure shrinking against the market crowd, swallowed by the noise of life continuing without him. I finished my latte, left a tip exactly equal to the fake $100 bill he once gave me years ago. Interest accumulated. As I walked toward the pier, the rain began again, fine and persistent. My phone buzzed with a message from Amelia. The restitution paperwork had cleared. The assets recovered would fund the Whitmore Women in Finance initiative within the month. I sent her a single line, Clause 17 complete. She replied, "Justice never defaults." I looked out over the gray water, the ferries moving like thoughts too heavy to dock. Somewhere behind me, Victor would wake tomorrow to another email from the SEC, another reminder that debt does not forget. I thought about forgiveness then, not as mercy, but as mathematics. To forgive is to release the balance sheet to close the account. But some accounts are meant to stay open until interest teaches its lesson. Would I forgive him? Perhaps someday, but not before time collected what it was owed. By December, the city had grown quiet again, as if the chaos of the summer had finally spent its energy. The Whitmore building stood like a patient survivor, its glass walls reflecting not triumph, but continuity. I walked through the lobby early one morning before sunrise, the marble floors glimmering with faint reflections of streetlights. The security guard greeted me softly the way people speak when they know something sacred is being rebuilt. Upstairs, the conference room had been transformed. The old portraits of men in dark suits had been replaced with photographs of new faces, women from across industries who had joined the Whitmore Women in Finance Foundation. What had once been a company was now a platform. Our first mission was simple: provide grants for women rebuilding their financial independence after betrayal or loss. I named the first program after my grandfather, the Richard Whitmore Initiative for Second Chances. The irony was not lost on me. The same empire that once measured worth in dividends was now calculating it in dignity. The paperwork for the foundation's legal structure arrived that afternoon. Amelia brought it personally, her gray scarf trailing behind her like punctuation. She laid the folders on my desk and looked around. "You have stripped it clean," she said approvingly. "No ghosts left except the good ones." I smiled faintly. There is one ghost still at work. I opened the top drawer of my desk and took out a small, sealed envelope. It had been delivered to me the morning after my grandfather's funeral. The handwriting was his steady, deliberate, unmistakably Richard Whitmore. On the front he had written, "Clause 18 for you." For days I had avoided opening it, afraid that the last words of a man who built my world might undo me. But that evening, when the city lights began to bloom outside my window, I finally broke the seal. Inside was a single page folded twice, and the faint scent of cedar. The sentence was short. "Legacy is interest you can live with." I read it again slower this time. It was not about money. It was about peace, the kind earned, not inherited. For the first time in months, I felt something loosen in my chest. I leaned back in the chair and looked at the skyline. The lights of Seattle stretched like data points mapping a story of losses and returns. Below, the sound shimmered, reflecting clouds that refused to decide whether to stay or go. Amelia returned from the window with 2 cups of tea. "You think heaven has audits?" she said with that half-smile that always managed to cut through solemnity. I laughed quietly. "If it does, Grandpa is probably chairing the committee." We sat there for a long time without speaking, the kind of silence that does not need translation. Somewhere in that stillness, I understood the meaning of the mirror clause. It was not about contracts or signatures. It was about reflection, the way truth forces you to see who you became when no one was watching. I had spent a year fighting, exposing, rebuilding. Now I wanted to learn how to simply be. The next morning, I attended the foundation's first mentorship session. The room was filled with women holding resumes, notebooks, and the kind of hope that feels heavier than grief. One of them, a woman in her 50s named Teresa, spoke about losing her retirement savings to a fraudulent investment by her brother-in-law. As she talked, her voice shook, but her eyes stayed steady. When she finished, I handed her a folder containing a scholarship letter. She opened it and began to cry quietly. In that moment, the noise of the world, the lawsuits, the headlines, the betrayal faded into something smaller than purpose. Justice had circled back into restoration. When the meeting ended, I walked to the rooftop terrace. The air was crisp, the wind carrying the salt of the sound. I thought about how different this view felt now. It no longer looked like ownership. It looked like release. My phone buzzed with a notification from the legal office. The restitution funds had been fully transferred, every cent accounted for. I closed the message and looked up at the sky. For once, I did not feel the urge to respond. The story had balanced itself. As the sun began to sink, the glass of the building caught its light and turned gold for a few seconds before dimming again. That flash was enough. I whispered a quiet thank you to the man who had taught me that balance is not the same as silence. It is the art of letting truth stay visible even after the storm. Justice did not make me rich. It made me free. A year passed before I heard his name again. It appeared quietly, almost politely, on the morning news ticker between market updates and weather alerts. Former executive Victor Lane, sentenced to 18 months in federal custody for securities fraud and ordered to repay $89 million with accrued interest. The words glowed against the bottom of the television screen, clean and final. I watched it from the kitchen of my apartment, a mug of coffee cooling between my palms. The anchor's voice was calm, rehearsed, unaware of the history packed inside those numbers. They called it justice. I called it arithmetic, finally complete. The footage showed Victor being led out of a courthouse wearing a plain gray suit, no tie, his hair longer, his confidence shorter. For a moment, I wondered what he felt as the doors closed behind him. Shame, perhaps, or just relief that the chase was over. Justice does that. It exhausts both hunter and prey. That afternoon, Amelia called. Her tone carried that measured satisfaction lawyers use when the law actually behaves. The repayment schedule is confirmed, she said. You will receive the full restitution within 30 days. I thanked her, but felt nothing like celebration. It was a strange calm, the kind that follows a long war when victory feels like silence instead of applause. When the transfer arrived, the numbers filled the screen of my laptop with the kind of precision that used to thrill me. $89,312,419.18. A year earlier, I might have stared at it in disbelief. Now it only looked like potential. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the city hummed with its usual contradictions: wealth and want, ambition and fatigue. I thought of the women I had met through the foundation, each with their own story of deception and recovery. The decision came quietly. By the end of the week, I instructed the foundation's accountant to allocate the entire sum toward a new scholarship fund for women rebuilding their financial lives after fraud or family betrayal. The paperwork required 3 signatures and a board vote. It passed unanimously. At the announcement event, a journalist asked if I felt vindicated. I smiled. I turned revenge into a tax deduction. The room laughed the kind of laughter that releases something collective. It was the first time humor felt like peace instead of armor. In the following months, the scholarship applications poured in. Single mothers finishing degrees, retired teachers, restarting businesses, daughters paying off debts left by careless fathers or brothers. Each story carried a small echo of my own. Each one felt like interest returned from a universe that insists on balance. Reporters kept calling, asking for quotes about karma. I never gave them what they wanted. Karma is not a spectacle, I said once. It is a system update. It runs quietly until one day the numbers change. They printed that line as if it were a brand slogan. Fine by me. The foundation grew faster than we expected. Partnerships formed with universities and credit unions. For the first time in decades, the Whitmore name appeared in headlines without the word scandal attached. The irony was delicious. One evening, I visited the office after hours. The building was dark except for the faint glow of the foundation's logo etched in glass. I walked through the empty hallway heels echoing against marble and stopped at the portrait of my grandfather that now hung near the entrance. His eyes in the painting seemed softer, less like command, more like patience. I whispered, "It's balanced now." The air felt lighter, as if he had heard. The next day, Amelia and I met for lunch at a small seafood place overlooking the Sound. She toasted with sparkling water. "To restitution," she said. "To reinvestment," I replied. She grinned. "You realize you are the only client I have who celebrates a court victory by giving the money away." I shrugged. It seemed appropriate. Money taken through deception should only serve restoration. That is the truest profit. As we left the restaurant, a man from a nearby table stopped me. "You are the woman from the Whitmore case, right?" I hesitated but nodded. He said his sister had just received a scholarship from the foundation. "Thank you for what you did," he said, "for proving people like that can actually face consequences." I smiled politely, but inside felt something deeper than pride. It was recognition, the quiet kind that affirms purpose without needing applause. Months later, as winter returned, I received a letter from the Department of Justice confirming Victor's full compliance with the restitution order. Enclosed was an official statement he had signed acknowledging wrongdoing and forfeiture of all remaining assets. His handwriting was still sharp, but there was a tremor at the edges. Reading it felt like closing a chapter that had taken too long to end. I placed it in a file marked Resolved and locked it in the cabinet. That night, walking home through the cold Seattle rain, I passed the Pike Place Cafe where we last met. The same table by the window was empty, the reflection of streetlights flickering across its surface like ghosts of unfinished conversations. I paused for a moment, remembering the man who once called greed business and deception strategy. Now his name existed only in records, in lessons and whispers among interns studying corporate ethics. History had turned him into a footnote. I felt no triumph, only the soft relief of completion. The air smelled of roasted coffee and salt from the water. I thought of my grandfather's words. Legacy is interest you can live with. I finally understood that it was not about inheritance, but about what remains when everything else has been audited out of you. By the time I reached home, the rain had stopped. The city lights shimmered across puddles like liquid gold. Inside, the foundation's ledger sat open on my desk, the balance column filled with zeros, the cleanest number of all. Have you ever seen revenge pay interest? It was late afternoon when I finally opened the last drawer in my grandfather's old desk. The metal lock clicked reluctantly, as if even it knew that some truths wait for the right moment to be revealed. Inside lay a stack of files, the kind that smelled faintly of time, and a small black envelope with my name written in my mother's handwriting. I froze. I had not seen that script since I was 19, since before she left the city, and the silence between us became its own geography. The envelope was brittle at the edges, sealed with the same wax stamp my grandfather used on his business letters. I sat down the room, bathed in the soft amber light of late October. For a long moment, I simply looked at the envelope, my thumb tracing the curve of each letter in my name. Then I opened it. The letter inside was short, the ink slightly faded but still legible. My daughter, it began. If greed ever wins, remember truth does not retire. There was no greeting, no apology, no story. Just that one line written with the precision of someone who knew she had little time left. I read it again and again until the words stopped being sentences and became air. It was as if she had known that one day I would need a compass, not for success, but for silence. I folded the letter carefully and placed it next to the watch my grandfather had given me the night of the birthday dinner. The two artifacts together felt like a dialogue between generations. The watch ticked softly beside the note, as if agreeing. That evening, the board of the foundation hosted a small gathering to celebrate the first year of its scholarship program. The event took place on the top floor of the Whitmore building, the glass walls overlooking the entire city. As people mingled, I stood near the window, the fading sunlight painting the room in gold and rose. It was the same hour of the day my grandfather loved most when the city turned reflective and honest. Amelia approached, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You look like someone who just opened a portal," she said. I smiled faintly. I found something from my mother. A letter. Amelia's expression softened. "Closure, then." "Not exactly," I said, "more like a reminder that some debts are paid forward." We toasted quietly, no speeches, no applause. The sunset deepened and the light fractured into 1,000 shards across the glass. From where I stood, I could see the reflection of the foundation's logo merging with the skyline. Legacy and city truth and consequence all layered together like a ledger balanced by light. As the guests began to leave one of the scholarship recipients, a young accountant named Grace approached me. She said she wanted to thank me for helping her start again after her divorce and financial collapse. Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not. "You gave me proof that the system can be fair," she said. I told her she had given me the same proof. When she walked away, Amelia whispered, "Your grandfather would be proud." I nodded but said nothing. Pride felt too small for what this was. This was continuation. After everyone had left, I lingered alone in the room. The city outside pulsed with light, each building a mosaic of lives trying to keep promises to themselves. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, and for the first time since the night of the betrayal, I felt complete stillness. It was not the stillness of endings, but of understanding. He thought money could erase legacy, but money never buys peace. Peace, I realized, is earned through endurance, through refusing to let lies dictate the final chapter. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. The last compliance report on the restitution had cleared. It felt fitting, the final audit closing as the day itself settled into dusk. I opened my grandfather's watch again. It still worked perfectly, the second hand steady as a heartbeat. Time had become its own witness, impartial and precise. I walked out onto the terrace where the wind carried the faint sound of traffic and seagulls from the bay. The horizon glowed with the last fire of sunset. I could almost hear my mother's voice in the wind, repeating the words from her letter. Truth does not retire. The sentence echoed softly against the glass towers, blending with the rhythm of the city. I whispered back, neither does love. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, the salt in the air mixing with the scent of jasmine from the rooftop planters. Below me, the world moved on, but I felt anchored no longer by revenge, but by clarity. I thought of all the people who would never see this view, who were still somewhere in the middle of their own storm, still waiting for their light to return. For them, I left the final words of the Foundation's newsletter that month. If you believe in quiet justice and silent revenge, in dignity over money, share this story. Because truth and closure belong to those who keep standing up for themselves, who know that revenge, through truth, is the real lesson in betrayal. As the last sliver of sunlight slipped beneath the horizon, I smiled. Justice had balanced the books. Peace had signed the final line.